Okay, so last week we left off in the middle of Perek Beis. We're up to Perek Beis, Pasuk Yud Zayin. If you have your own Sefer Daniel, that's fantastic. If not, Michael will just listen. It's fine also. All right, Perek Beis, Pasuk Yud Zayin. So to wrap up, just to do a little quick up to date here. So we had in the beginning of the second Perek, the Nebuchadnezzar has this dream, and he calls in everyone, all the wise people, and he says, I need someone to tell me what my dream is, and in addition to telling me what the dream is, also to tell me what the interpretation of the dream is. And he says, anyone who can't do such a thing is going to be chopped up into pieces, and we're going to blow up their house, and that's the deal. So you see he's not messing around. And everyone basically says, that's not possible, we can't do this. Anyway, Daniel, in the end, finds out about this, or knows about this, and he goes up to the chief executioner, the guy who's in charge of death row, and he says to him, maybe I can try to find out what's going on. So we pick up in Perek Beis, Pasuk Yud Zayin. It says Daniel went home, and Pasuk Yud Ches, again, from last week, I'll do the same thing where we're reading certain psukim and skipping a lot of them because it's in Aramaic. Pasuk Yud Ches, V'rachmin lemive min kadam ela shemaya. So Daniel goes home, and he asks the Rachamim.
Use it for something else.
Can you hear me on the Zoom? So he asks Hashem, Al Raza Dina, about this secret. Dila Yehovdun Daniel v'chavroi. So Daniel and his friends are not killed. Imshar Chakimei,
Don't go through that way.
with all
Yes,
the
I
rest,
do.
the Chachamim of Bava.
4, 6.
Okay. So what happens? Hashem comes to him, and he reveals him the dream. And the pasuk doesn't tell you what it is yet, but he reveals him the dream. And Daniel goes on in the next few psukim, praising Hashem. From pasuk Yud Tes through pasuk Chav Daled is Daniel praising Hashem, thanking him for granting him this great wisdom. Yeah, try to on. No, no. Yeah. You could just, if everyone can make sure they are muted on the Zoom. I don't think I have the
Or
ability
come
to
to
do
the
that.
share, or come
Yeah.
to Moshe.
Do I have control over that? Oh, I do. Okay, totally.
I'm sorry for interrupting, but you're muted.
Sorry, thank you. Okay. I just said one pasuk. Was pasuk Chafei? Thank you for letting me know that. We're good now. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, good. Thank you. The pasuk I was just reading while I was muted was that Daniel goes to Arioch. Arioch brings Daniel to the king, and he says to him, look, we found this person. He's from the Yehudim, one of the Jews who you brought here, and he thinks he knows the interpretation of your dream. Okay, so pasuk Chavav. Anei Malka v'amer lo Daniel. So the king speaks up and says to Daniel, Di Shemei Belteshazzar. He calls him Belteshazzar. He gave him this name of an idol. And he says, Hayisach kahel lahoda usani chama di chazesu b'shrei. You really think you can tell me? Are you able to tell me what the dream was and what it means? So Daniel says, again, reminding us very similar of Yosef with Paro, pasuk Chav Zayin, Anei Daniel kadam malka v'amar. Daniel answers and he says to the king, Raza di malka sha'el, the secret that you want to know, lo chakimin ashpin chartumin gazrin yachlin hachvay lamalka. Just to recap, he says, Nebuchadnezzar, remember, no one could do this. You asked a lot of people. You had doctors and the astrologers and the magicians and the fortune tellers. No one could figure it out. Biram. However, Isai Allah Bishmaya, there is a God in heaven. Gale Razin, he reveals secrets. Vahoda Lamalka Nebuchadnezzar Ma di Laheve Ba'achris Yomaya. It is God who has chosen to reveal to you what is going to happen at the end of time. Chelmach, your dream, v'chezve reishach, and the things you're seeing in your head, al mishkavach, while you're lying down, denahu. This was your dream. So I'm going to tell you the dream. He first is going to summarize what the dream is, and then he's going to say what the interpretation was. So before we do that, I just want to point out one thing, which is appropriate here, and it's on the source sheets here. There is a question, which is, Daniel obviously was privy to this information, which HaKadosh Baruch Hu shared with him. So where does that put Daniel? Is Daniel a Navi? It's interesting, I didn't do this as the intro, but the Sefer Daniel is actually not part of Nevi'im. It's part of Kesuvim. So, okay, the book of Daniel is part of Kesuvim, the writings. It's not part of prophets. It's not a Navi Tanakh. So Daniel is not a Navi. It's in Kesuvim. So is Daniel a Navi? Well, Hashem is communicating with him through a dream, and he's about to, and sorry to spoil it, but he's going to get the dream spot on, and Nebuchadnezzar is going to be quite impressed. So where does that put him? So there's a Gemara on the sheets on Aleph. The Gemara quotes a pasuk from later on in Sefer Daniel, and it says that V'ra'isi ani Daniel avadi es hamar'eh. Okay, we're going to get to that story hopefully, where Daniel sees some kind of thing that happens. V'ha'anashim asher hayu imi lo ra'u es hamar'eh. The people who were with him did not see this vision. However, they were extremely frightened about something, meaning they sensed something was off. And they ran away in a complete panic, and they hid. So the Gemara asks, Ma ninhu anashim. So who were these unnamed people who were with Daniel in this event later on? So Rabbi Yirmiyah Bar Abba says the three people were names you may have heard of: Chagai, Zechariah, and Malachi. That's who it was. Chagai, Zechariah, and Malachi. Okay, those were three Nevi'im. Those are actually the last three Nevi'im in the book of Trei Asar. So they're Nevi'im during the times of the second Beis Hamikdash. Chagai, Zechariah, and Malachi. So now the Gemara comments, and it says, Inhu adifi minei. Chagai, Zechariah, and Malachi had an advantage over Daniel. An advantage over them. How so? The Navi. Ihu adif minaihu. He had an advantage over them. Di'ihu chaza, because he experienced this vision. V'inhu lo chazu. And despite the fact that they weren't Nevi'im, but despite the fact that, they were Nevi'im, they did not experience this vision that Daniel had. So the Gemara seems to be pretty clear here in Maseches Megillah. The Gemara says that Daniel was not a Navi. So we might wonder, well, then that would explain why his Sefer isn't Kesuvim. It's not a Nevi'im. He was not a Navi. But clearly HaKadosh Baruch Hu is communicating with him. So this brings up kind of probably a sheer in and of itself, but we're not going to deal with that now, quite in depth. But essentially what perhaps the idea is that in order to be a Navi doesn't necessarily just mean that Hashem communicates with you. Okay? Maybe the first time the word Navi appears in the Chumash is in the beginning of Sefer Shemos. And who is called a Navi? Anyone know it? Sefer Shemos? Okay, Miriam Hanaviyah. Okay, good. So it does say Vatikach Miriam Hanaviyah. Very good. By Uz Yashir, right? After they're singing. So Miriam is called a Naviyah. And who else is called a Navi? Aaron, right? Not Moshe. Aaron's the first one and Miriam's the second one. So Aaron is called a Navi. Where is Aaron a Navi? So Moshe Rabbeinu says to Hashem, in the beginning of Sefer Shemos, he says, I can't go to Paro. He's not going to listen to me. So he says, you're going to go to Paro. Aaron achicha, and Aaron your brother, yihiyeh nivi'echa. He will be your Navi. Right? Hashem is not communicating with Aaron there. Right? What's the context of Aaron being the Navi? The context is that Hashem is saying, you are saying that you're going to have difficulty speaking and relaying the message to Paro. So I'm going to tell you everything you need to do, and you're going to relay it to Aaron, and Aaron is going to be your Navi. He's going to relay your message to Paro. So you see the word Navi in the Chumash. Navi means what? Navi doesn't mean that Hashem communicates with me, as cool and neat as that is. That's how we perceive it. It's more than that. It's that it's a communicator. It's a messenger it's like a medium. It's a person in between A and B. In this case, it was between Aaron, Moshe and Paro. And when we talk about Navi, we talk about the person in the middle of HaKadosh Baruch Hu and Am Yisrael. So, which fits in with the word. The word navi, usually, people say that it comes from the word nive, which means to, like, say, to communicate. So part of being a navi isn't just getting the communication, it's relaying something to Am Yisrael. So it's interesting. In Sefer Daniel, you see, HaKadosh Baruch Hu is going to be communicating with Daniel plenty. But he's not going to the people to relay something. It's like stories about Daniel. And apparently they felt it necessary to record the stories in the Sefer, which were, again, necessary for Klal Yisrael to know and to learn about, and there's something we can learn from it, but he's not relaying messages to Klal Yisrael, do X, do Y, this is why we have a problem, go fast for me, while I'm doing the experiment like we did last week of organic foods, right? None of that, it's just stories about him. So that perhaps might be the concept of why he's not a Navi, although he is experiencing some kind of Ruach HaKodesh, clearly, and messages from HaKadosh Baruch Hu. That being said, in Beis is the Abarbanel. So the Abarbanel on his Sefer, on Sefer Daniel, and he says, "Umi hu zeh ve'ezahu mehanavim hamaforsamim b'uma." Who is it, and who is so great as one of our very famous Nevi'im in our nation? Shirau maros elokim ka'ela, who experienced these tremendous visions of God, v'yodiu asidos, and he made known the future, muflaos la'alafim, me'ashanim ki Daniel. Who is so great as a Navi who did all these fantastic things that we're going to read about in our Sefer as Daniel. So the Abarbanel seems to understand that perhaps he is a Navi. So, okay, it's kind of up in there. I mean, again, his Sefer, then you'd have to go back and try to figure out why Sefer is not included in Nevi'im and it's in Ksuvim. But again, the Gemara seems to imply that he's not a Navi. The Abarbanel seems to face value imply that Daniel is a Navi. Okay, so now what's the dream? So let's see what happens. So Daniel goes to Nebuchadnezzar, and he says to him, I'm going to skip to Pasuk Lamed Aleph. Pasuk Lamed Aleph 31. And I'm going to read, it's 4 Pasukim that are going, 5 Pasukim that are going to describe the dream in detail. Ant Malka, you the king. Chazei Havaisa, you were looking. Va'alu Tselem Chad Sagi. There was a tremendous big statue. Tselem is a statue. Dichein Rav. It was enormous. Vizivei Yatir, and it was like shining. Ka'im lekavlach, in front of you. Verevei dachil, and its radiance was pure. Hu Tzalma, what did the statue look like? Reishei di dahav tav, the head was made of gold. Chadohi udraohi di kasaf, the chest and the arms were silver. Ma'ohi v'yarkasei di nechash, the stomach and the thighs were copper, nechoshes. Pasuk Lamed Gimel. Shakohi di parzel, the thighs, the legs, really. Shakohi is the leg. Shakohi is the legs. Di parzel were iron. Raglohi, and the feet, minahain di parzel, one was iron, uminahain di chasaf, and the other was earthenware, pottery, clay. Okay, so this is important just to get the details down here because it's going to play into what it represents. So there's a big statue. Here's his dream, okay? Golden head, silver midsection, okay? Copper stomach, and iron legs with feet mixed with iron and clay. That's the dream. Now he continues. There's more to it. Pasuk Lamed Daled, 2 more psukim. Chazei havaisa adi hisgezeres even. You were watching, and along came a stone, an even, dilavi dayan, which was carved out, but not by hand. Umachas litzalma al raglovi, and smashed the statue at its feet. Di parzala b'chaspa, which were made of iron and clay. V'hadekes himon, and it crushed it up. Last pasuk. Beidayan daku kachada parzala chaspa nechasha kaspa v'dava. At that point, at one moment, the iron and the clay and the copper and the silver and the gold, everything was crushed up. Vahavu ku'ur min idrei kayit, and it was like something that you find like at a threshing floor that is like the light part of the grain, which is like blown away into the wind. Unasahimon rucha, the wind lifted it off. V'chol asar lo hishtakach lachon, and not a trace was left of the statue. V'avna di mechas litzalma, and what about that stone which smashed the whole statue? Havas latur rav, it turned into a large mountain. Umalos kal ara, and it filled up the entire land. Okay. What is the meaning of the dream? So moving on to Pasuk Lamed Zayin. So I'm gonna, let me read the psukim about what the dream represents. It's 4 psukim here again, and then we'll recap and see how it plays into the details of the dream. So what does it represent? So Daniel says to Nebuchadnezzar, Pasuk Lamed Zayin 37. Ant Malka, Melech Malchaya. You were the king of all kings. You're very powerful. Biggest empire in the world right now, Nebuchadnezzar and Baba. Di Elah Shemaya Malchusa Chisna V'Takba V'Yikar Yahadlach. Okay, Elah Shemaya, the God in heaven, granted you a kingdom which is Chisna, mighty, V'Takba, and powerful, V'Yikara, and beautiful. And God gave you this fantastic kingdom. Everything basically is under your authority. You rule over everything. Antu Resha, you represent the head, Di Dahava, which is gold. So golden head on the statue, that's the kingship, or that's Nebuchadnezzar, or the kingdom of Bavel. Pasuk Lametes 39. Ubasrach, after you, Tikum Malchu Achari Araminach. Another nation is going to get up and rule after you, which is going to be slightly weaker than you, and that would be the chest and arms of silver. Moving down, Umalchu Tlisa, and the third kingdom, Achari, Dinachasha is copper, Ditishlat B'chol Ara, which is going to rule over the entire earth. And that's the stomach made of copper. Umalku Rivi'a'a, and the fourth kingdom, Pasuk Mem, Teheve Takifa Keparsla, is going to be powerful as iron. Kol Kavel Di Parsla Mahadek V'Chashel Kola, just like iron smashes and breaks everything. Ukeparsla Di Mira'a Kol Ilain Tadik V'Teroa, and just like iron can smash and grind up and break everything, that's what this fourth kingdom is going to do. Okay. Skip to Mem Daled. Skip to Mem Daled. Pasuk 44. Uviyomehon. And then finally, during the times of this fourth kingdom, what will happen? Di Malchaya Inun Yikim Elah Shemaya. The God of heaven will arise. Malku di la'olmin la sischabal umalchusa la'am achara la tishtevek. Okay, he says there's a pattern here, right? There's 4 kingdoms. Each one keeps on going down to the next. He says, along comes HaKadosh Baruch Hu, the God of all gods, the God in heaven. He says, and he has a kingship which is not destroyed and is not given over to any other type of authority. Tadik v'tasef kol ilain malkavasa, it will smash and crush up all of these other kingdoms. V'hi tukum le'ol maya, and it will last forever. Okay, so we have the dream, and we have the interpretation on a basic level in terms of what Daniel gave to Nebuchadnezzar. What is the dream practically? So I want to go through a few different, there's one basic understanding of the dream, and then we'll show you a few. I put on the sheet a chart. There are a few variances among some of the Mefarshim here. So starting out with the gold. So interesting. The Malbim points out, what does he say about the gold? He says Nebuchadnezzar represents the head of gold. And he says, in Pasuk Lamed Zayin, Daniel says to Nebuchadnezzar, Hashem gave you chisna, takba, and yakara, right? Which we said was like might, power, and beauty or glory. So the Malbim says this fits with the representation of gold. Because what is gold compared to all the other metals? So the Malbim says gold has 3 advantages over the other metals listed here. Number 1, it's the most, we would say, durable. Okay, it doesn't rust as easy as the other metals. Okay, so that's the chasna, it's mighty. Okay, you have might. You're represented by gold. Gold it endures, it does not rust. Number 2, what's the other advantage of gold over other metals? Mitzad chasko miyeser hamatchios. Just in general, it is just more strong and powerful. That's the word takva. You are a powerful king. Okay, you're strong, you're mighty, you destroyed the Beis Hamikdash. Everyone's under your authority. Okay. Number 3 is yikara. What is the advantage of gold over the other metals? Is the fact that it is precious. It's more expensive than the other ones listed here. So those are the 3 things that line up to Nebuchadnezzar. Okay. That's the one thing he says. The rest of the interpretation is somewhat vague. The second one is the silver. So the silver are the arms and the chest. So this is unanimously. The Medrash believes this, Rashi says this, all the Mefarshim say. Who is this referring to? Who is this kingdom? So it says this is the kingdom of Paras and Madai. Paras and Madai, Persia and Media, right? Which is going to take over after Nebuchadnezzar. And that's where we have, right, the Purim story with Achashverosh, right? That's Paras and Madai, Persia. Now, the Mefarshim point out, Rav Sadigon says, that is why, what is the imagery of the statue, right? There's the chest and the arms are silver. So the arms, meaning there's two parts to it, right? There's two parts to it. So two parts, Persia, Paras Umadai, right? And that's the silver part, okay? Number 3 is moving on, is the copper aspect. So what's copper? So the third kingdom. So everyone seems to accept that this refers to Greece. And this is Alexander the Great and that whole, kingdom. What is the fourth kingdom? So the fourth kingdom is where things kind of get a little bit, there's somewhat of a disagreement here. The classical interpretation of the fourth kingdom, when I say classical, I mean what the Medrash says. The Medrash says the fourth kingdom is Rome, right? Or what we call Edom. Okay, in Chazal, they call it Edom. Okay, good. We're going to talk about that. Good. So that's about right. So most people, I think, would say that that's where we are now, right? That's what we're under now, and they say that relates to Rome, and that is usually associated with Christianity. That's like what's going on.
Where Christianity took over Rome.
Correct. That's how it's understood. Now, okay, that's a good question. Good. So Aaron Leib is asking, so we said by the silver chest, right? So it fits well because you have the two arms, and that's Paras Umadai. So the question is, how do we deal with the bottom being two different materials? The way that some explain it is that the two different periods represent, the two different materials, I think, are two different aspects of one malchus, which is there's the powerful part of it, which is the barzel, okay, which is the iron, and then there's the clay part of it, which means that at certain points this kingdom won't be as powerful as it was, but it will kind of fluctuate between power and something which is more vulnerable, like clay. Okay, so that is, the Medrash says that, and that many of us may have heard that before, the four kingdoms. This is basically where it comes from. So Rav Sadia Gaon and the Ibn Ezra, they both say there is a major part of history here which is being left out, and that is Islam. So they both believe that Islam is somewhere in this fourth kingdom. Now, Rev Sadia Gaon says what Aaron Leib said. He says the two different materials in the bottom part of the statue, the clay and the iron, is because the fourth malchus is Christianity and Islam. The Malbim kind of says something similar as well, and he says, therefore, again, you have the idea of one being iron, one being clay. It's not clear to me whether they're saying one specifically is iron and the other one is clay, or it's just, again, back to this idea that Christianity and Islam, and there's like an up and down in this like, relationship of power struggle between the two. Oh, yeah, okay, fine, right. Not what, amongst those people themselves?
No, religious knowledge is the two kingdoms. It's basically or west versus east, actually.
Interesting. Okay, I didn't see that anywhere, but that's
but it changed only now, meaning at one point, for a good percentage, for 1,000 years, the West was very religious and Catholic and whatever. It's only post when he entered that in the last 200 years, or 100 years.
Oh, okay, good. Okay,
Right.
okay. So to piggyback off what Tzvi and Ari are saying, so the thing is like this. It doesn't say, again, Daniel doesn't describe what these things are. So the Mefarshim, it's important to realize the Mefarshim here are trying to figure out what do these four things represent. And the truth is, some question and say, well, why do we assume it's going to stop at Islam? Like, what about, meaning the assumption here is that whichever one number 4 is, the next stop is what? The next stop is the big stone. And the big stone is Mashiach.
I mean, it's also fascinating with Rashi and the Medrash. Okay, so when Rashi lived,
Ah.
even though Rashi lived under Christendom, he was probably aware of Islam was already a powerful force. But the Medrash, even if you say the Medrash, whenever the Medrash was written, it was something, I mean, unless it can't predict something that didn't exist yet.
Good. Okay.
Or at least
So-
it can't say it in a term that we would understand it as such.
Okay, good. So Ari, you're saying that what? You're saying that the Medrash is not
Whatever
bringing
Medrash
up.
written, even the Medrash, even if it's Tarsh al
Good.
it can't discuss, I mean, it's possible, I guess it can say Arabi, but that would be prophetic in a sense, because they
Okay.
were not, but Islam did not rise until the Gemara was finalized.
Okay, good. So Rav Yaakov Meidan, who's one of the Rosh Yeshiva in Gush, in Eretz Yisrael, so he has a series of shiurim on Sefer Daniel, and he suggests this idea. He says that basically each of the Mefarshim is kind of looking at their experience in the world and saying, this experience that I'm living through, this must be the Malchus. So, like Ari's saying, the Medrash was written long before Islam was a power. So the Medrash stops at Christianity, and that's it. Okay? Rav Sadia Gaon lived during Islam, and Ibn Ezra in the 1100s in Spain also. So he does suggest that, and he says that what they're doing essentially is like applying their own life experiences to assume what to make sense of the thing. You don't like that?
No, I was gonna say Mormons, but maybe they'll. I don't know.
I mean, truth is really not a contradiction. It's the last Gullahs.
It's the last, right?
And some of the Jewish people were, for a long time, continued under Edom, whereas another half of the Jewish people ended up under Yishmael.
Right. So okay. So this is what he predicts. Okay. So at the conclusion of the parak, pasuk Memvav is Nebuchadnezzar's response. Beidayan, again, at that point. Malka Nebuchadnezzar nefal alam poi. So he falls on his face out of submission to Daniel. Ula Daniel sigid, and he bows to Daniel. Umincha v'nichochin amar l'nasachale, and he demands that people offer sacrifices and presents to Daniel because he's right. He sees that there's divinity in him. And then he says something fascinating. Oneim al kol Daniel va'amar, and Nebuchadnezzar then says to Daniel in Pasuk Mem Zayin 47, Min kishot di Elohachon hu Elah Elohim. It is clear, and in truth, I see that your God is the God of gods, Umarei Malkin v'Galei Razin. He is in charge of all the kings, and he is the one who reveals secrets. Di Yechel Tal Miglei Razadina, the fact that he was able to reveal this secret. Okay. So I want to bring up one point here. It's something that Ariel actually asked last week. Ariel asked a good question at the end of the shiur last week to me about the first parak, and it's worth thinking about. And I don't have the answer yet, but I'm working on it. We read a very nice story last week about Daniel and how he gave up. How they didn't want to eat the non-kosher food. So he said, what's going like? Is this like all a mushal? Did it really happen? Like, if it did really happen, like why do we care? It's like a nice story and all, but like, what does it do for us? So the truth is that Barbanel really deals with this. At the end of each parak, he basically spot on deals with exactly Ariel's question, which is, why do we have this parak here? Why is this important? Why do we care? So I didn't look what he writes for that one. I'm going to never get that before next week. But he does point out here something interesting. We pointed out last week how there's a lot of parallels between Daniel and Yosef. And now we see the other side of the parallel, right? He comes in, he interprets a dream, and it's going to say in a moment that he appoints Daniel to be one of the chief people in his court. So very similar to Yosef. It's interesting though, because when you think about it, there's one main difference, which is that the whole dream of Paro. If I asked you why do we care about the cows and all the stuff? Why is that whole dream in the Torah? Why is that important? So it would be reasonable to say that is in the Torah because that is what gets Yosef into power, right? And then and puts him in that position in Mitzrayim. And then the brothers come down and he's able to help them, and that whole thing, which is a huge piece of the puzzle. After this story is very isolated. Nebuchadnezzar has the dream, and Daniel hits it spot on. And Nebuchadnezzar recognizes HaKadosh Baruch Hu, but in terms of how that plays out for the rest of the story, that doesn't say that Daniel doesn't end up saving the Jews because of this. So it's very different than the Paro story. The Paro story is like a huge piece on like Am Yisrael and Mitzrayim and Yosef being there and the Golos there. Here, it's very isolated because after Daniel finds it out, so true, Nebuchadnezzar comes to realization of HaKadosh Baruch Hu. But that's basically it. So the Abarbanel asks, like, why is this story important? Why is it here? And why did the dream happen? So there's two elements. I guess one is, why did the dream happen? And then, why is it here? So the Abarbanel doesn't say the first thing, but Rabbi Meidan suggests, he says, what happened before this, right? So Nebuchadnezzar conquered Eretz Yisrael and destroyed the Beis Hamikdash. And he saw himself as a tremendous power. Okay? And he says that what is HaKadosh Baruch Hu essentially relaying to Nebuchadnezzar in the dream? He's basically relaying to him that, yes, it's true. You were successful. You took over Israel. Granted. Okay? Wonderful. But that's not because of you. It's because of me. Right? Which the Gemara says, right? The Nebuchadnezzar was the shliach of HaKadosh Baruch Hu. The question is, did he want to see it that way or not? Right? So does he see himself as a shliach of HaKadosh Baruch Hu? That you're right, the Jews paid the price and the Beis Hamikdash had to go. And he was the conduit for that to occur. Or does he see himself as like, it's me, it's all me. So the dream now follows. He has this dream and the dream is telling him, no, my friend, there's a cycle here. You're just at the top. And after you, it's just going to keep going. And the grand finale, who's writing it all, is the Evan, is HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Now, why is that important for us to know about? Why is that important for us to know? So maybe that in of itself is important, just that we should, that's definitely important for Nebuchadnezzar to know. So the Barbanel says a few different possibilities here in Gimel on the sheet. And he says, I'll do Aleph and Gimel, I'll skip base for now. V'hayotzi mizeh hasipor. What comes out? Why is this important for us? Hu lodas shleimus Daniel ben Nevuah. Again, the Barbanel thought Daniel was a Navi. And it teaches us how perfect he was in his Nevuah. V'goloi hasodos v'ha'amukos ba, and how he could reveal these tremendously secretive things. V'shehu hayasiba shenebuchadnezzar hemin sh'Hashem yisbarach hu Elokei Elokim v'Adonai ha'adonai. He was the means that brought Nebuchadnezzar to recognizing HaKadosh Baruch Hu. And that's important for some reason for us to know. Skipping down to Gimel, maybe a little bit more practical for us. V'yatza lanu gamkein mizeh hasipor od tikva rabba lahatzlachasenu u'geulaseinu. Right? This, which should speak to many of us, right? Especially now, right? 2021. That you see that this is all part of history, and there's a big expanse here, and not to get stuck, in the head or in the chest or in the stomach or in the feet. And this is all part of a flow which HaKadosh Baruch Hu is guiding. And even Nebuchadnezzar was a piece of that, but it wasn't about him, it was about HaKadosh Baruch Hu. And that's really what's going on here. And we see that there is hope. There's going to be an end. There's going to be the Evan's going to come. It's going to be HaKadosh Baruch Hu bringing Mashiach. And that's, Bezras Hashem, where we are headed hopefully soon. And that comes out of that parak. Okay, let's just begin Parak Gimel, and then let's stop here actually. Just stop for questions, and then. Did I not put that in? No. What do you mean?
The iron legs. Everybody skips that.
Correct. It's really that they view. Okay, good. Tzvi's asking that everyone basically sees that the iron and the clay as a part, but not like the iron legs. It seems to be they kind of lump together, like the legs with the feet is like all one thing. I mean, that's how Daniel explains it. Daniel says the Malka Revi'ah is basically the legs with the feet. If you look, he says, where is it? Well, not there, but if you go back, right, he says in Pasuk, Pasuk Lamed Gimel, right? That's kind of grouped together. Shakohi di Parzel, right? The thighs or the legs are iron, and then the feet are iron and clay. Correct. Well, that's what leads Rav Sadi Gaon to say that. Oh, okay.
Yeah, two totally different stuff.
Okay, I see what you're saying. Two different things. One could be pure iron, and then one is like iron and clay.
Yeah.
That's a logical suggestion. I don't know why anyone doesn't say that. I don't know the answer to So had- correct, right, correct, meaning, good, right, similar type of, yeah, it's very similar. Yeah, it says that Mordechai was at the king's court as well. The one difference between Nebuchadnezzar and Mordechai and Daniel, when it says that Mordechai was there, it says Mordechai Yoshev Bishar Hamelech. Mordechai is by the king's gate. That's before he does anything, right? He's by the king's gate when he hears Big Son and Teresh talking. He's not elected there. He's not like put there as like a reward for doing something. Daniel seems to be promoted to the king's court. Any other comments? Or please. Anyone on Zoom? Any comments before we move on to Parag Gimel? We'll just introduce Parag Gimel today. Okay, let's introduce it, and then we'll. We're not going to do the whole thing, but Parag Gimel begins with the following: Nebuchadnezzar Pasagal, Nebuchadnezzar Malka Avad Slain Didav. Now it's important to recognize that this is a progression. So there's some reason why the next story is going to be here, and it'll play into everything we just said about the four Malchuyos. You'll see. Nebuchadnezzar Malka Avad Slain. So now he makes a statue. He had a dream about a statue. Now he's making a statue. Now watch, what does he make the statue of? Di Dehav, pure gold. Rume Amin Shitin. It was 60 amos tall. So to put things in perspective, we're talking somewhere between 90 and 120 feet tall. Okay, pretty big statue. 90 to 120 feet. Yeah, 90 to 120 feet, 60 amos. Okay, Psaye Amin Shis. And it was 12 amos wide. Okay. Akime, he stood it up, Bivikas Dura Bimedinas Babel. So you put it in its place in Babel.
No, this is chronological.
Okay, so it's
Because he just finished recognizing God, and then his next adventure is to make the gigantic.
excellent, good. So Ari's asking a basic question. Is this chronological? It seems to be a little bit odd. The last thing says Nebuchadnezzar, like we almost have him on the verge of like Gairus, right? He's like, hey, Hakadosh Baruch Hu, yay, right? And he's very submissive. And now he's making this big tell. He didn't internalize it. Ooh, very good. Okay, good. So Aaron Leib is picking. Okay, so what does he make the statue out of? Gold. What was gold in the dream? In the dream, the head was gold. So he's the head. So now he makes a statue. And he says, no. The statue is not a composite. The statue is all gold, because that's me. Now there's two possible pshatim here. One of which Aaron Leib is saying, which is maybe perhaps he says what he says to Daniel, but it's really lip service, and he doesn't really truly believe that Hakadosh Baruch Hu is it, and he really thinks it's him. He says, and I'm going to demonstrate that. One possibility. The other two possibilities, one is from the Rav Sadigon. Rav Sadigon says, why is he doing this? He says, to answer Ari's question, following the dream that he had, so now he says, what's the end game of the dream? Is Klal Yisrael. And he knows they're Jews, right? Daniel's there, right? So he says, what's he hoping? Now we're going to spoil a little bit. Chashav b'libo lahapil es Yisrael ba'alila. We're going to see what's going to happen is he's going to make a proclamation. He's going to say, there's a big statue here in town square, and we're going to play lots of music, and there's going to be a whole big party. And at the time you hear the music go, everyone's got to come and bow down to the statue. So the Rav Sadigon says he's playing off of the dream, and he's saying, wow, the Jews really have this thing called God, and he's really on their side, and this really is working. And I'm in trouble because I know where my dream is headed. So he says, let me try to do something to trip the Jews up. Okay, this kind of plays into like this is like the portrayal of, you see this in Chazal, of many of the antagonists throughout Tanakh, right? It's interesting. The antagonists in Tanakh are very, at least the way the Chazal portray them, are very unlike the people who hate us now, right? The people who hate us now want us dead, right? The antagonists in Tanakh, Chazal always, and I'm just saying this is how, right, is often, they're saying, like, they have all, like Bilam knows the exact time that Hakadosh Baruch Hu was going to get angry, right? Like they knew, like they seemed to be like, as we would call, holding, right? They're really holding, and like all these cheshbonos, so like how to get Hakadosh Baruch Hu instead of just like kill the Jews, right? So it's like very like systematic. Like the Jews do this, Hakadosh Baruch Hu's on their side. We have to undermine it somehow. So that's again playing along these lines. Where Sadiq says, "I'm going to undermine the Jews, get them to bow down to the idol, and then their God won't be on their side." The Malbim says a little different. The Malbim says basically, Shechashvu, he believes, Ki bepu'ulos ka'ele, by making the statue, yuchlu levatel horaos shamaimios uloshonosam. He says he took the dream from Hashem as real, as emes, and he takes this as a sign from heaven. So he says he now does something physical to try to cause these powers that be to somehow be reverted and undone. And he says, maybe if I can make the statue full of gold, right? And then so that will like kind of like undo what this like sign from heaven is. And it'll be like a physical demonstration that no, I'm gold, I'm it, and I'm the be all and end all, and that's it. So three possibilities there, okay?
So,
What he's driving at.
It's interesting according to these two shoving that he's saying, so that he's acknowledging that Hashem, he's acknowledging it and trying to combat,
Right.
But the question is, so he elevated Daniel just because he's smart? I mean, then it says that, he didn't take it out on,
He didn't take what out on Daniel?
like, because he's not happy with Daniel's, he's accepting it as truth, but
Right.
he's not happy with the situation.
Right. There seems to be this like duality here, right? He's impressed with what Daniel did, right? He didn't say, "Oh my gosh, you're predicting this, off with your head," right? He didn't say that, right? Because which that possibility didn't exist by Yosef, right? By Yosef, so he's telling Paro what to do and how to help him. Here, if anything, like that's a good point, Ari, that you would think Nebuchadnezzar might say, "Oh my gosh, this is what you're predicting? Get out of here!" But he seems to be satisfied with that. And now he's flipping and he's kind of saying, okay, but maybe I got to do my hishtadlus, right? To borrow the term kaviyachol, to try to overt, to undo it. Yeah, Rob, you were gonna say?
No, I said the difference between that America, stand up to the flag, don't do anything.
Oh, very good. Okay, good. So what happens? So I'll just say it outside and then we'll close and pick up with this next week. So he says, we're gonna play all these instruments, which is in Pasuk Dalet and Hey. If you want to read in English, Pasuk Dalet and Hey, he says, we're going to play all these instruments and you're going to hear this whole big thing going on. And at that point, everyone's going to bow to the idol. To the statue. I slept. I'll tell you why in a second. Uman deloyi pelvi is good. Whoever doesn't do this, ba'ashata, at that time, yisrame, they will be thrown, legoy atun nura, into a fiery oven, yakidata, which will be, lit and burned alive. Okay, so what happens? Pasuk Zion, everyone, lo and behold, they start blowing these horns and they're playing these strange instruments and people are blowing flutes and this whole musical ensemble is happening and everyone gathers together. Kol kabel dana beizimna krivu guvrin kazdain va'achalu karteon di Yehudai. Okay, so everyone bows down and the people come to Nebuchadnezzar and they say, we have a report for you. By the way, you should just know there are these three people who didn't comply, and they are Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah. Right? Oh, thank you. So two things we have to figure out. One thing is they didn't comply, and he's going to say, okay, that's it, into the oven you go. So one question we want to explore is, where's Daniel? It's interesting that Daniel's not in the picture, right? So Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah are here, and Daniel's not there. So you could say maybe, they don't want to rat on Daniel because he's got like a good position in the court, perhaps. Although it's interesting, then you think maybe he would be able to help Hananiah, Mishael, Azariah, right? Maybe he does. We'll see, right? They're sentenced to the oven. Maybe Daniel can help somehow. He's got a high up position. That's one question. The second question is, which is going to be important to figure out, is what we talked about why maybe he made the statue. The question is the statue really avodah zarah, or is this, again, if it's just about him trying to overturn the dream, perhaps it's not avodah zarah. He doesn't want anyone to worship it. He just wants to make a proclamation that he's the man in charge. So that's going to be a question, whether is the statue avodah zarah or not. And that will also probably then determine, we're going to have to figure out if it's avodah zarah, then okay. If it's not avodah zarah, why didn't they bow down to it? What's the big deal? What do you say? Okay, that might help to try to figure out like what exactly would constitute avodah zarah. Okay, good, because they're bowing to a statue. So you like if that. Okay, good. Right, Ariel's saying if the statue represents he's more than God, so isn't that avodah zarah essentially? Okay, so we'll have to explore that next week, and then try to figure out where is Daniel. Daniel's missing. So what happened to him? Where did he go in the fire? All right. Have a wonderful Shabbos.
Wow.
Oh,